University of Alberta, McGill, and Stanford. He's recently retired 30-year heart and lung surgeon, and a critical care specialist. He is known as the North American pioneer of heart and lung transplants, implementing the first heart and lung transplantation program in Western Canada. He's performed the first heart transplant in 1985 and the first combined heart and both lungs in 1986. The success of his program grew to be the largest and most successful in Canada and one of the largest programs in North America. Impressive. He has been recognized with numerous awards and excellence for medicine as well as community service. He is an exceptional community leader and a brilliant mind, and he's always advocated for the overall health and wellness and well-being of the people of Alberta. He is a key driver in this project. He has been from the beginning. He's one of the founding members, and he is also the CEO of the Alberta Prosperity Project. And on top of all of that, he has had a great political influence with the premiers Getty, Klein, and Stelmach. And he is here today to talk to us about Alberta prosperity and freedom through independence. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome one of the good guys, Dr. Dennis Modry. I call him the walking encyclopedia.
Thanks, Dana. Oh boy, that was loud. Can everybody hear me well? I expect so with that volume. So for those of you who were listening to that introduction and you recognized that it took me 17 years to learn something, you must have thought that either I really know a lot or I'm just a really slow learner. You can decide. Anyhow, it's wonderful to be here and to have this opportunity to speak with you. I'm going to start off a little bit different today than some of my previous presentations. How many people here have heard of Stephen Covey? Right, so he wrote the book, 7 Habits of Highly Influential People. And the second habit is to begin with the end in mind. And so what I'd like to do is exactly that. Think about what would be if we can change things. How many people here, and we'll start from an economic perspective, how many people here are pensioners? Just raise your hand. Right. How would you like to have another $3 billion added to your pensions in this province? Raise your hand. Right. Well, do you realize that that is very possible because we now overfund the pension plan by $3 billion a year? Now, how many people here, raise your hand, are currently employed and pay taxes? You pay income tax. Okay, how would you like a flat 8 to 10% maximal marginal tax rate? Right. That also is possible. Why? Because we send to Ottawa $60 billion a year, for which we get back roughly 27. So you can imagine what we can do with that $27 billion. Now, how many people here would like to get out from under the carbon tax? It's about everybody. We pay dozens of taxes, many of which you don't even know about. What about ending equalization? How many people here would like to end equalization? Right. Well, these are all possible if we come together and we do something amazing that's never been done before. Now, I want you to think about something with respect to purchasing power. If you were to go to the grocery store and you wanted to buy, say, a 10-ounce tenderloin, and it cost you $10, just for argument's sake, and you knew that you could also buy that same tenderloin at another grocery store and it cost $30, how many would prefer to pay $10 for that tenderloin? Right. Seems obvious, doesn't it? Well, this is what happens at the federal level. When you want to purchase something from private enterprise and it costs you $1 to purchase that product or service, to get that same product or service from the federal government, it costs you $3. I want you to think about how inefficient that is in terms of your own well-being and your own economy. Now, in addition to that, let's think about if we can take control of all of that, how much better your lives would be in terms of your purchasing power, your cost of living, and your quality of life. But let's look at now the issue of freedoms. How many people here would like to be free of overgovernance, overregulation, and overtaxation? Just about everybody. And that makes sense. How about freedom from wokeness, cancel culture, and critical race theory? Right, there's another one. What about freedom from the Great Reset that's coming at us like a freight train? So these are things that are possible to be free of. Look at the freedoms we've lost. Do we have freedom of speech still? Not really. We've lost, at least for a period of time, freedom of religion, freedom of association. We've lost those things. They're coming back, but we've lost them unnecessarily. Freedom of movement. What about that? We've lost freedom of movement, haven't we? And we still have, it's still in existence. Canada is the only country, one of the only countries that restricts us from travel. Did you know that the federal government wants to absolutely restrict how far you can travel by train, plane, or automobile? And of course, the price of gasoline actually is a boat anchor on how far you can move anyhow, because who wants to spend a lot of money on gasoline these days? But here's a freedom that I think should be very troubling. The freedom that has been lost is the freedom of families to be the moral, cultural, and spiritual pillar of society, to pass on to future generations beliefs, values, principles, responsibility, accountability, critical thinking. Much of that has been usurped by a socialist education system that are teaching things to young people that they don't need right now. They don't have a mature enough mind to process what's being thrown at them. Don't you think it would be time that we get this responsibility back into the hands of parents? Do you agree with that? Now, we truly are facing an existential threat, ladies and gentlemen, to our very way of life, to our individual freedoms and rights and our prosperity if we do nothing. Jack Mintz, the chair of public policy at the University of Calgary, for example, has pointed out that ending our oil and gas industry is going to result in a 1/3 reduction in the average income of Albertans. Think about what that will do to your quality of life and the cost of living and your enjoyment, and how it will affect future generations as well. But I'm here to tell you that there is hope, because we together can do something amazing that's never been done before. If we come together for common cause and unite to protect our individual freedoms, rights, prosperity, and self-determination, we can control our destiny in a way in which it has never happened before. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to explain to you where we are now in terms of what our options are. If we do nothing, we know what's coming. How many people here really understand the details of what's coming down the line with respect to the Great Reset? Okay, you have a pretty good idea. Let me just touch on a couple of points to highlight the concern. Now, I got to tell you, with a scientific background, for me, when I heard about the concepts of the Great Reset, I thought it was all a conspiracy. Until such time as I actually looked at the World Economic Forum website and the United Nations website, and now we're hearing it come on the mainstream media as uncredible as that is, the mainstream media, at least in this case, they're honest. They say, this is what's coming, the Great Reset. So this is a highly influential movement by the global elites of the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. They've come together on a contract called Agenda 2030, the purpose of which is to reset the global economy and to restructure society and how society operates, the very fabric of how we function, by using banks, governance agencies, and environmental, social, and governance metrics to control billions of people. So here's the way it will work. You'll be given a digital ID. And if you don't think that's coming, this province and some other provinces have already submitted a request for proposal from the IT world to develop a digital ID for everybody. So you'll have a digital ID. That's point one. The next thing is they want to implement a digital currency. And if you think it was easy for the federal government to advise the banks to suspend the accounts of those people who supported the trucker convoy, it will be a lot easier for the federal government to bypass the banks and just freeze your account when they want to. The third thing that is planned in the Great Reset is to give everybody a social credit score. And that's based on how you interpret environmental, social, and governance issues, to the point that if you are compliant with what the federal government wants you to do, you will move up in terms of your permissions. So you will be, in essence, you will be pinned, cataloged, categorized, tracked, and controlled in everything that you do. This is the plan. Now, you've probably heard Klaus Schwab, and that it's now a famous comment, you will own nothing and be happy. That is what he has said. And that is what they are advocating for. So the global elites will create one strata of society, and everybody else will be below that. This is a way to eliminate the middle class and that entrepreneurial can-do spirit that particularly Albertans and many people around the world embrace. Now, they want to create one line of thinking. They want you to become equal to everybody else, but at a minimalist level. They want you to think alike. Well, the fact is we're all individuals, and we should be celebrating our diversity, not trying to make everybody equal. There's a reason I don't play basketball in the NBA. It should be obvious, right? So we're not all equal. We're equal before or in the eyes of our Creator, but we are not all equal, and we should celebrate the differences and support each other's differences, not demean them, which is what's happening now with cancel culture out there. If you have a difference of opinion, you get canceled or dismissed or deemed irrelevant. This is not right, but this is actually what is happening. Now, I liken the circumstances that we're in as being a canoe on the Niagara River. And you know which way that canoe is going. And eventually, you're going to hear the rush of the falls. And at one point, you have an opportunity to paddle to shore and get to the shore. At another point, it's too late. And you've missed the boat, as it were, in this case. But you didn't miss the falls because you're going over those falls into the abyss of the Great Reset. Now, these are things that are coming. And I know there's a lot of people who understand this, but the majority may not understand what is coming. And it's up to us and you to educate people and make them concerned about that. Make them concerned about their quality of life, their economics, their ability to pass on the fruits of their labor to future generations. So what can we do about this? Well, one of the things that we can do is we can look at the future and say this. Let me pose this as a question, because I think this really gets to the heart of what the solution is. How many people here, just by raising your hand, how many people here would like the next provincial government to be in a position of strength to protect your interests, your individual freedoms and rights, your prosperity and your self-determination? How many people here would like that? Is there anybody here that would prefer that the next provincial government is not in a position to protect your individual freedoms, rights, and prosperity? So I see no hands being raised, so I assume, really, that you're all in favor of the next government protecting your individual freedoms, rights, and prosperity. If that is the case, the next question I want to pose to you is, are you willing to give the next provincial government a mandate to protect your individual freedoms, rights, and prosperity? Just by a show of hands, how many people would give the next provincial government that mandate? Okay, if you would give the next provincial government that mandate, then the next question is, are you willing to trigger the Clarity Act to make that happen? Now, how many people here know what the Clarity Act is, the Federal Clarity Act? Couple of people. Okay, most people don't know what the Clarity Act is. The Clarity Act was developed by the Supreme Court of Canada. And it was developed by the Supreme Court of Canada because the federal government asked the Supreme Court to define the pathway for a province to become an independent country. In other words, to leave Canada. And there are three very important components to that Clarity Act. Number one, a province that wants to leave Canada has to pose to the electorate a clear question that is easy to understand. Number two, there has to be a clear outcome. Now, when Quebec wanted to have a referendum on independence, what you needed was a 50% plus one majority. That still holds because that is still a clear majority. But the third point is the key one. This is the most important point of the Clarity Act, because what the third point defines is the requirement for the federal government and the provinces to negotiate with the province that has a successful referendum on independence. So here's the way it can work. And you need to really get into your mind the notion that in 116 years, no provincial government or federal government has ever protected Alberta's interests. That's really important to understand. And therefore, what can we do different? So I want you to think about, before I get into where we go with the Clarity Act, let me ask this question. How many people here would prefer that Alberta remain in Canada, but with control of its wealth and control of its affairs? Right, there's a number of you. And how many people would prefer that Alberta become a new sovereign constitutional republic? Okay. So I would say, just ballpark, it was about 2/3, 1/3 in the audience. Now, this is very important to understand. Is it possible to fix Alberta's circumstances in Confederation? And let's look at it from the perspective of ending equalization, because that's topical. In October, we had a referendum on ending equalization, and the majority of Albertans who did voted in favor of ending equalization. So let's see if it's possible. And I want you to think of ending equalization as a metaphor for ending any egregious program that harms Alberta's interests. For example, Bill C-69, the pipeline ban, Bill C-48, the tanker ban. the issue of, for example, the Canada Health Act, which prevents creative solutions to solving the problems in healthcare. How many people here know that we function in Alberta, our system functions in the lowest quartile of performance in the highest quartile of cost? So there are serious problems with respect to our healthcare system. And just go back to the point that I made earlier. When you are seeking a product or a service from the private sector, it costs you $1. From the public sector, it costs $3. Having worked in this system for many years, for 30 years, I can assure you there are problems that are easily resolvable in the healthcare system at multiple levels, because the fault occurs at multiple levels. But anyhow, I digress. Getting back to the point that let's think of ending equalization as a metaphor for fixing all of the problems that are plaguing Alberta with respect to federal-provincial governance relations. And let's look at it through the lens of history. Now, I already said to you that from a historical perspective, no federal or provincial government has protected our interests, our individual freedoms and rights, or our prosperity. And that is true. That's a true statement in 116 years. But why is that? Well, Alberta was incorporated along with Saskatchewan September 1, 1905, thanks to the efforts of a gentleman by the name of Sir Clifford Sifton. But what he said in 1904 is really prescient, is really important to understand, because what he said then informs us as to why we are in the dilemma that we are in now. So what he said in 1904 was, we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, and when he refers to Canadian patriots, he's referring to those people who live in the regions of Quebec and Ontario, because it's a year before we joined, before Alberta and Saskatchewan joined. So we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies refers to Alberta's wealth and Saskatchewan's wealth, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the east, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way contribute to our prosperity. And nothing has changed. That was the genesis of for example, the national energy policy. And it goes on and on and on. So that's history. Let's look at ending equalization through the lens of the structural electoral imbalance we have in Canada. So as you know, we do not have representation by population. PEI, for example, elects one federal member of parliament for every 40,000 population. Alberta elects one for every 130,000 population. And it's no better in the Senate. Saskatchewan and BC have 25% of the population, 11% of the Senate seats. So what does this mean? It means this, that every federal election, it means two things. Every federal election will be decided by voter-rich Quebec and Ontario. And number two, it doesn't matter the party that's competing to become the next government or the next government, they will always pander to the wishes of Quebec and Ontario at Alberta's expense. And that has been our history. Now, if we want to end equalization and we want to fix Alberta's circumstances in Confederation, so for those of you, and there are many others in the province that also want Alberta to remain in Confederation, let's look at fixing Alberta's circumstances through the lens of the Constitution itself. To change the Constitution, for example, to end equalization, to end federal tax collection and allow the provinces to do it, to get out from under the regulatory overreach that inhibits the development and transport of our natural resources, etc. Here is what is required. Number one, you have to have a majority vote in the House of Commons to open the Constitution and change it to benefit Alberta. Number two, you have to have a majority vote in the Senate to open the Constitution and change it to benefit Alberta. Number three, you have to have 7 of 10 provincial legislatures representing 50% of the population also voting in favor to end equalization. And how do you think Quebec would vote? They get 2 of every $3 of equalization. And speaking of Quebec, that's the 4th hurdle. Quebec believes that it has a veto, even though it never signed the 1982 Constitution Act. And actually, they demonstrated that they do have a veto, because a couple of weeks ago, they passed in their legislature what is termed Bill 96, which abridges minority language rights in Quebec. So if you live in Quebec and you're English speaking, your language rights have just been abrogated. So they demonstrated they do have a veto. No, it'll be challenged, but the Quebec legislature isn't going back on this, I can tell you, unless there's a change of government, perhaps. And then there's the 5th hurdle, and that's the Supreme Court itself. Now, when there's a constitutional battle, and there would be a constitutional battle, for example, with Alberta wanting to take control of federal taxation and various other things that we've touched on, then those constitutional battles take decades to resolve, not years or months or years, but decades. That's the history of dealing with very complex issues at the level of the Supreme Court. But more important than that is, let's look at how the Supreme Court would likely adjudicate anyhow. You need to understand there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. They're all appointed from the Prime Minister's office. 3 are from Quebec, 3 are from Ontario, 1 is from the Maritimes, and 2 is from all of Western Canada. So what do you think the odds are that the Supreme Court would side with Alberta over Quebec and Ontario? Not going to happen, is it? And they demonstrated that not too long ago. How? By approving a carbon tax. And that carbon tax overruled the Constitution. Now, for those who still think that it's possible to change the Constitution to benefit Alberta, there have been 2 previous attempts to change the 1982 Constitution Act, and one was the Meech Lake Accord, and the other was the Charlottetown Accord. They both failed. So what it means, folks, is that it's extremely difficult to fix Alberta's circumstances in Confederation. And if we try, how much time do we have before this socialist Marxist agenda crushes us? Not that long, 2030, but we're progressively losing ground as time wears on. So what are our options then? What is it we can do? Because these are the 2 paradigms. We've already decided that we don't like the idea of the Great Reset. We don't like the idea of doing nothing. We already know that about 1/3 of this audience prefers that Alberta stay in Confederation, and 2/3 prefers that Alberta get out of Dodge. What do we do about this? We have these 2 paradigms. Both paradigms want a better quality of life, more control of their affairs, particularly their individual freedoms. That's what people want. That's what you folks want. So how can we align these 2? Well, it's like I posed the question. How many people here would like the next provincial government to protect their interests, individual freedoms, rights, and prosperity and self-determination? You raised your hand. How many people would like to give the next provincial government a mandate to do so? You raised your hand. I explained how you trigger the Clarity Act. You have to have a successful referendum on independence to trigger the Clarity Act. So how would it work? Let's look at this from a timeline perspective, because we don't have that much time. 2023, you elect a government that will do that which it can do legally within the Constitution and the construct of Canada as it is. In 2023, the government can pass a bill, call it the Alberta Sovereignty Act, which is what the Free Alberta Strategy has proposed as a name. Interestingly enough, in our strategic plan, we coined the same term. But here's the key things of that act, is that it accelerates the process of taking control of policing pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection. That is all legal and within the Constitution. Taking control of provincial tax collection sets the stage for taking control of federal tax collection. So now you've set the stage by doing that. The Sovereignty Act also changes banking and insurance and security regulations to protect depositors from CRA and the federal government. So the kind of thing that happened to those of you who may have supported the truckers and had your accounts frozen can never ever happen again. So, but here's the key thing. Here's the key thing, is that in that 2 years, because you can take control of those 5 things that I just said, you can take control of all of those things within 2 years. So by 2025, you have control of those things. But that still doesn't give Alberta the control that it needs in terms of preventing the Great Reset or controlling our own wealth, because in order to do so, you have to take control of federal taxation. Then you really have control. So what happens then in that first 2 years, the next provincial government is negotiating with Ottawa in order to take control of federal taxation, to end equalization, to end Bill C-69 and Bill C-48, to end the Canada Health Act, and other things that egregiously, adversely affect Alberta. And what, in so doing, what that provincial government is then doing is demonstrating to Albertans the intransigence of Ottawa in order to deal with Alberta, that they will be unwilling to give up on those things. So that sets the stage, ladies and gentlemen, for a petition, or for a referendum rather, on independence. And meanwhile, the Alberta Prosperity Project in this next year and in the next 2 years after that will be continuing to educate Albertans on the rationale and merits of independence. So you have that referendum on independence in 2025. That's the plan. You have that referendum on independence. At that point, a successful referendum gives Alberta, for the first time in 116 years, the ability to negotiate with Ottawa and the other provinces from a position of strength. And how do the negotiations go? Well, it starts off, you have these negotiations with Ottawa, and if Alberta gets everything that it wants, then Alberta can remain in Canada. But you know what it will also do? It will trigger other provinces who also want individual freedoms and rights and prosperity. And they will want the same thing. So this, in a very real way, has the prospect of saving Canada and other provinces. But on the other side of the coin, it's more probable that Ottawa will be intransigent and not negotiate in good faith and not provide Alberta with what it wants to benefit all of you and your descendants. In which case, after a period of 6 to 12 months, Alberta then has the moral and legal legitimacy to simply say the negotiations have failed, just like happened with Brexit in England. They failed, and Alberta becomes a new sovereign constitutional republic. That's how it would work. So it's really not complicated when you think about it. I know I've said a lot, it seems complicated, but it is not that complicated. So what APP is doing to help get this messaging out, and by the way, I should tell you, all of the UCP, for example, MLA leadership candidates understand what I've just said, and they embrace what I've just said, because no government that is in power wants to be emasculated in the sense that not having power to do that which is right for its citizens. No government wants that. So this is a way in which, for example, the UCP could resuscitate itself. But there's also the option of the independence parties finally coming together and creating a credible alternative. And we'll see if that will happen. So what we're doing, of course, is we want to grow this movement to 500,000, 1 million, or 1.5 million people. Because as Ralph Klein used to say, he used to muse about this, he'd say, find a parade and get in front of it. So in essence, we're creating that parade. We're creating that movement where the next government has to get in front of what we're doing in order, one, to be elected and to carry out the mission of protecting Alberta's interests and prosperity. So in order to grow the membership to that level, and why it's important, by the way, the politicians know this, it's called the 3.5% rule. It was coined by Erica Chenoweth, a Harvard professor. What she determined is that just 3.5% of a population can control the direction of that society. So when Jason Kenney and the UCP were elected, they had 120,000 members, which is exactly 3.5% of the voting electorate of 4.4 or 3.4 million people. We have 4.4, but the voters are 3.4 million people. So that's why growing the membership to 500,000 or 1 million, that's 15 to 30% of the population, which allows you folks to control the outcome of the next election. And that's why it's quite important. So we're setting up educational chapters throughout the province. I thought maybe we would get to 70 or 80 or 90, but we're already at 121 and it may be more now. And these educational chapters are really educational hubs where they have the appropriate information, pamphlets, videos, etc., in order to educate people in those regions and to come on board this independence movement. And you can think about it as independence within Canada or independence untethered to Canada. It doesn't really matter. If we don't have leverage, we can't pull off anything. So we're educating people at events through these chapter developments, and we've finally come to contractual agreements with Rebel News, Western Standard, Touch Broadcasting Canada, and paid social media to get our messaging out and to help grow this movement. So I'm very excited about it, and I'm very excited about the prospect of what it is we're attempting to accomplish. From my own personal perspective, as a retired, well, when I was in active practice for 30 years as a cardiovascular and thoracic surgeon, I could help one person at a time. And when I saw what was happening to this fantastic province and to our people, and to see how so many people are suffering because of poor governance, and because I've had a background in politics, but behind the scenes, I thought, well, I'm going to do something with some very capable, like-minded individuals and some fantastic volunteers, and we are going to make a difference. We will come together and we will save this province, and we will save our individual freedoms, rights, and prosperity. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave you one final comment, and that is that freedom is not free, and you can never have prosperity without freedom. And we had, as you know, fought 2 world wars, our forefathers, for our freedoms and our prosperity. And this is our war now, and we will not let them down. Thank you very much for your attention.